Have you ever noticed how loud the world has become? Everyone sharing, oversharing, explaining, justifying, trying to be heard. But as we grow older, something inside us starts to shift. A whisper rises above the noise. Maybe I don't need to say everything to be understood. Maybe peace doesn't come from expression, but from discernment. Now imagine this. You're 67. You've built a life brick by brick, raised children, paid mortgages, survived mistakes, held hands through losses. You've earned your silence. You've earned the right to not explain yourself. But one morning over coffee, you casually share your retirement plans with a nephew, and suddenly you're drowning in advice you never asked for. At first, you nod politely. Then, you start to feel it, your independence slipping, your choices questioned, your peace invaded. That quiet sanctuary inside you, disturbed. And in that very moment, a truth surfaces. Maybe it's not selfish to keep some things to yourself. Maybe it's wisdom. This is where Harold found himself 67 years old, standing at the edge of a new kind of clarity. He didn't announce it. He didn't write it down. He simply decided, I will protect what gives me peace. Not out of pride, not out of bitterness, but because not every thought needs an audience. Not every truth needs to be weighed by others. Science supports what Harold felt. According to studies from Stanford and the National Institute on Aging, older adults experience deeper emotional regulation when they focus on meaningful interactions and reduce cognitive clutter. That means the less unnecessary input or output, the more peace and the more control we feel over our lives. Harold didn't become quieter because he had less to say. He became wiser because he had more to keep. And so today, we explore 5 things you may want to keep for yourself, not because you're hiding, but because you're honoring the wisdom you've earned. You've spoken for a lifetime. Now it's time to reclaim the calm that comes from choosing what stays unsaid. Because after 67, sometimes the strongest voice is silence. 5 gentle truths you should keep to yourself after 67 for a peaceful life. Truth number 1, your retirement numbers, the silence worth saving. Should you tell your family exactly how much you've saved? Only if you're ready to trade peace for opinions. It started like any other Sunday. Harold brewed his coffee, opened his blinds, and welcomed the morning like he always did. But that day, he let something slip. While chatting with his nephew, he casually mentioned the number his retirement fund. He said it with no agenda, no pride. Just a moment of openness. A vulnerable moment. By Tuesday, the advice had arrived. Articles forwarded, podcasts sent, charts explained. His inbox filled with links to optimize his money. And the soft murmur of judgment crept in beneath their good intentions. You should probably downsize. Think about the grandkids' future. Maybe invest more conservatively. Suddenly, Harold wasn't the captain of his ship anymore, was a passenger being steered by other people's opinions. He didn't need a second opinion. He needed a second cup of coffee and space to think. That's when the shift happened. He looked around and realized his financial life had become a topic of discussion instead of a private source of confidence. And the more people knew, the more they felt entitled to weigh in. But peace isn't found in decimal points or charts. It's found in the quiet confidence of knowing your life isn't defined by what's written on paper, but by the values you've lived, the choices you've owned. So Harold made a new rule. His finances would be between him, his legal advisor, and God. He didn't stop loving his family. He simply stopped handing them a lens through which they might misjudge his life. And with that quiet decision, something returned. Dignity. Boundaries, after all, are not walls. They are windows with curtains you can choose to open or keep drawn depending on the light you need. Have you ever kept a decision to yourself and felt better because of it? Share it in the comments. Your quiet strength might just be the wisdom someone else needs today. Truth number 2. Your minor aches and pains when silence heals more than words. It started with a soft ache in Harold's left knee. Nothing dramatic, just a stiff twinge on cold mornings, the kind you walk off with a little stretch and a quiet grunt. He mentioned it over lunch. By the end of that week, his calendar was booked solid. Orthopedic referrals, a new supplement regimen, low-impact yoga videos emailed from his niece in California. His pantry was filled with turmeric, fish oil, magnesium spray, and 3 brands of joint support tea. It came from love. Of course it did. That's what made it so hard. But in trying to help, his family unknowingly rewrote how they saw him. They started watching him differently. Are you sure you should climb those stairs? Want me to pick that up for you? Maybe don't drive today. In just a few days, Harold felt something shift. He hadn't become weaker, but somehow he was being treated like he had. He missed being seen as capable, independent, steady. So, he made a choice. From that day forward, he only shared what needed to be shared. When something was serious, he spoke. When it was just another morning stiffness kind of day, he smiled, sipped his tea, and moved on. And little by little, he noticed something else shift, his confidence. It came back not because his knees stopped hurting, but because his dignity stopped being on display. You see, not every cough, cramp, or creak deserves a family meeting. Some things, when shared too often, don't bring closeness, they bring concern that morphs into control. Harold wasn't pretending to be fine. He was choosing to lead with strength instead of symptoms. Because aging with grace isn't about denying the aches. It's about deciding which ones deserve a microphone and which ones don't. So the next time his back twinged, Harold paused and said nothing. And somehow, that silence felt like healing. Truth number 3. Your thoughts on family drama, the opinion that echoes too long. Add warning. Getting involved in family drama after 6th or 7th of May cause unexpected emotional heartburn, recurring frustration, and mild regret lasting several holidays. Harold had learned this the hard way over a meatloaf and a misunderstanding. It started when his 2 grandkids began arguing over who should inherit their grandmother's upright piano. A family treasure, yes, but also slightly out of tune and impossible to move up a flight of stairs. Harold, in a moment of well-meaning wisdom, offered a suggestion. Why not let the oldest decide? He thought he was helping. Within minutes, both grandchildren were upset. One cried. The other stormed out. His daughter didn't speak to him for 2 days. The piano stayed exactly where it was, but Harold's peace of mind had moved far, far away. That night he sat with his tea and realized something. The argument would fade, but the memory of his words, that could stick around forever. So Harold adopted a new policy, short, kind, and drama-proof. I trust you'll figure it out. 6 words, no sides taken, no judgments made. Just quiet respect for others' ability to work it out without him as referee. Because family tension is like quicksand. The more you move, the deeper you sink. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is stay still and let them find their own way out. After all, being the wise one in the room doesn't mean being the loudest. It means knowing when your silence speaks louder than your opinion ever could. So now, when the tempers rise and voices spike at the dinner table, Harold smiles, takes another bite, and says with practiced calm, I'm sure you'll figure it out. Then he passes the mashed potatoes. No judgment, no sides, just serenity. And somehow that small act of stepping back keeps the family closer. If you've ever chosen silence over conflict, hit that like button. You know its power. Daughter, Dad, did you ever regret not moving to California? Harold thinking, yes, sometimes, but saying it out loud might sound like I regret raising you here. The room was warm, the lights dimmed after dinner. It was one of those quiet conversations that sneak up on you, not planned, not heavy, but suddenly there. His daughter's question wasn't meant to hurt. It came from love, from curiosity, from that shared hunger we all have to understand where we came from. But Harold paused. The truth? He did sometimes wonder about the life that might have been, the small bakery he never opened, the ocean he never lived near, the sunsets over the Pacific he only ever saw in magazines. He had carried those thoughts for decades, not with sorrow but with tenderness, like a photo never framed, just gently folded in memory. But something in him knew, to speak them out loud now, might rewrite a story that never needed changing. His daughter might hear, "You weren't enough," when what he meant was, "I wonder, but I wouldn't trade." So he smiled and said, "Not really. This life gave me everything I needed." And it wasn't a lie. It was the whole truth that mattered most. Some regrets aren't meant to be spoken. They're meant to be honored quietly, reflected on, learned from, and then folded gently into the fabric of who we are. Harold writes them down sometimes, a sentence here, a thought there, or a melody that lived only in the hum of thought never sung, but deeply felt. He keeps them in his wisdom drawer, because he's learned not every truth needs an audience. Some truths deserve solitude, the dignity of being held close, not handed out. After all, we don't always owe the world our internal echoes. Sometimes peace comes not from releasing everything, but from knowing what to hold with reverence. And Harold, he chooses peace. Truth number 5, the full financial picture, when too much truth becomes a trap. Have you ever shared something and instantly wished you could take it back? Not because it was wrong, but because the way people responded made you feel smaller. That's how Harold felt the day he mentioned rising costs over breakfast. He didn't mean to complain. It was just a passing comment, groceries are really adding up lately. But by the end of the day, his niece had sent him 3 budgeting apps. His son offered to look into managing his monthly bills, and his daughter quietly asked if maybe he should consider downsizing for peace of mind. That's when it hit him. In one honest moment, he had gone from being the head of the family to becoming someone they were quietly worried about. It wasn't cruelty, it was concern. But even loving concern can carry the sting of unintended pity. What he longed for wasn't praise but perspective. To be seen not as a man slipping, but as one still standing, still choosing, still holding the reins of his life with quiet steadiness. So he drew a new line. He still shared the essential his estate plans were solid, his medical directives clear. One trusted advisor had the full story. But everyone else? They got what was necessary, nothing more. Because wisdom, Harold realized, is knowing the difference between being transparent and being exposed. He didn't want his relationships to orbit around what he had or didn't have. He wanted them to revolve around who he was: a father, a grandfather, a man who'd lived, learned, and still had plenty to give. And when he stopped talking so much about money, something beautiful happened. Conversations turned from numbers to memories, from worry to warmth, from control back to connection. Sometimes peace doesn't come from adding more to the table. It comes from removing just enough to make room for what truly matters. Have you ever felt the pressure to explain more than you needed to? What did you choose to keep for yourself? Share your story or simply type wisdom below. You're not alone. The wisdom drawer, where silence becomes strength. Harold has a drawer in his desk. It doesn't lock, it doesn't even close properly, but inside, it holds more than paper. There are letters never sent, ideas never spoken aloud, thoughts too tender or too dangerous to be shared in the moment. A regret from 1974. A thank you he never got to say. A memory too beautiful to risk being misunderstood. This drawer isn't filled with secrets. It's filled with peace. Because as Harold has learned over time, not every truth needs to be heard to be healed. Some things are written down, reread in silence, then tucked away not to be forgotten, but to be carried with grace. We all need a wisdom drawer. It might not be a real drawer. It could be a worn notebook, a folder buried in a laptop, or even just a quiet corner in your mind where things are sorted slowly, without rush, without judgment. Because aging gracefully isn't about saying less, it's about saying what matters, and letting the rest rest. Harold opens that drawer once in a while, not to relive what he didn't say, but to remind himself of how far he's come, of how many storms he's weathered silently, of how much wisdom lives not in speaking, but in knowing when silence holds more power. So today, we invite you to create your own. What would you place in your wisdom drawer? A lesson you've learned too late to teach? A dream you no longer chase but still cherish? A truth you hold close, not out of fear but out of respect for its weight. What we keep inside often reveals the strongest, gentlest part of who we are. Do you have a wisdom drawer of your own? A place not made of wood or metal, but memory. A quiet space in your heart where thoughts rest before they're spoken. Where the unsent letters, the unspoken truths, and the unneeded apologies find their home. Tell us about it if you'd like, or simply write wisdom in the comments below. No explanation needed. We'll understand, because Harold's journey reminds us of something gentle but powerful. Peace doesn't come from being fully known. It comes from being gently understood by others, yes, but first and foremost, by yourself. And as we grow older, we realize some of our most sacred moments are the ones we never had to explain. Some of our strongest choices are the ones we quietly made, alone. And some of our most beautiful relationships are held together not by words, but by respect for what was left unsaid. So wherever you are in your journey, know this: you can live deeply, even in quiet. Wisdom isn't in the volume, it's in the choice. And sometimes, being whole means being whole with yourself first. If this message stayed with you longer than the words themselves, subscribe. Share it with someone whose silence holds more kindness than most people's speeches, because strength like that deserves to be seen. And may your next chapter be written not with noise, but with grace. We'll see you again soon. Until then, keep what matters, let go of what doesn't, and always, always choose peace.